so it's been a little while since I've uploaded a video, but I have been working on stuff, and I got a new project. I actually got a new car, and the new car is the 350Z, and I just wanted to take some time and actually set the car up and actually test some parts on it and basically get it set up for drifting. So that's what I've been doing the last couple weeks. So in a couple seconds we're going to get into it and I will show you everything that we did. So this is how the Z looked when I first picked it up with a faded silver hood. So of course the first thing I had to do was get this car looking presentable. The color is Nissan Daytona Blue. Shout out to Harbor Freight Paint Guns. Well, I think it came out good. I have to wait till daylight to know for sure, but looks pretty smooth. Now that I got the cosmetic stuff out of the way, it's time to prep this car for some drifting. Work has already commenced. I've already got the stock catback down on the floor here. So I've started the process already of pulling out the rear differential. I've got the axles disconnected already. Alright, so I went ahead and pulled the housing out. Then I went ahead and removed these bearing caps. They got to go back in the same way they were, so I'm gonna orient them in the box the same way as the housing, so we know where they go. They're both sitting there on the side they go on, facing the way they go. And next thing I got to do is I got to knock these half shafts out. Alright, so I've got Sledgy here. Yeah, it popped right out. So this is the stock viscous LSD coming out. These things work great on the street, but they don't really have a solid enough lockup for drifting. So we're going to swap that out with a Tomei T-Trax. The Tomei T-Trax is a two-way differential that will lock aggressively both on acceleration and on deceleration, which is really important for predictability and drifting. Make sure when you order you select the correct carrier for your application depending on whether you have an open differential housing or the viscous housing. I definitely recommend also ordering a new set of carrier bearings from Nissan. If you try to take the ones off the stock differential, you're going to have a really hard time. Here's the part number. You can write that down or just check my link. I'll put links to everything in the description. I'm removing the ring gear from the stock differential now so that I can reuse it on the new Tomei differential. There she goes. So here we have the Tomei differential with a fresh set of OEM Nissan carrier bearings installed. The bearings will drop right on if you take the differential and put it in the freezer for a couple hours before. Just take a block of wood and they should slide on with a hammer and a block of wood. Now we'll attach the stock ring gear to the new differential. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and Loctite all these bolts, because if these things ever backed out, this whole diff would grenade. So we're going to go ahead and put these in. Alright, the ring gear is now mounted.
Alright, next thing we gotta do is get the carrier back into the case. We're gonna have to set the races in and put the shims in. Alright, so I got this thing after a few gentle taps. Got it seated down in there. The bearings are seated down. So once again, we're gonna throw some thread locker on these. Now this beveled part here, if you look at the races, you see there's a beveled side and a straight side. The beveled side is going to go on the outside, and just in case you forgot. Okay, we're doing the other side. Alright, time to put the axle stubs in. Alright, so I got some black RTV going on here for maximum oil resistance. We're going to put that all around the case, and a little bit on the lid. We'll do a thin layer on both sides, and we'll slap that together. Alright, we got a nice even coat on both sides, a nice thin even coat. Now we're going to slap this mother together. Put that little nipple thing right in the hole. Alright, axles are just about back in. Alright, so it's time to fill up the diff now. I'm going to be using this Tomei diff fluid, which is specifically made to work with their clutches. Alright, so now that the diff is all filled with fluid, I'm going to take the opportunity to install the diff brace. This is just a little extra motion control here. Alright, so that brace just links the differential up to the subframe for a little extra motion control so it doesn't jump around too much. And we've also already got these urethane bushings to help with that also. So the next thing I gotta do is install these Hotchkis sway bars. Got Hotchkis front and rear, fully adjustable. One nice feature about the Hotchkis is that these are hollow tubes, so they're actually lighter than normal. And we've got these 3 link spots where we can get different amounts of stiffness. I'll put a link to where I got these in the description.
So here's a little side-by-side comparison with the stock rear sway bar and the Hotchkis rear sway bar.
Another nice feature is we got these greasable bushings. Alright, we're bolting up the sway bar now. Bushing bolts are in. I'm going to leave these a little bit loose until I get the links on. Alright, so the way this works with these adjustable sway bars is, depending on which hole you use, you're going to get a more or less firm sway bar. So if we go all the way to the inner hole here with the link, that's going to give us our stiffest setting, and that's what I want. I want to try to have a little bit of bias towards understeer, so I'm going to firm up the rear, and that's going to be our first setting here. And I will run the front sway bar at middle setting. Okay, so I've got my links bolted up. Next I'm just going to tighten up the bushings. Alright, got both those sides done. That's it. That's the rear sway bar. Alright, next up, this is where I really cheaped out. I got this eBay exhaust. This was like $180, and one of my friends had one and he said it sounded good, so I'm gonna give it a shot. If it doesn't sound good, what I'm probably gonna do is take the mid pipe that came with it and just put a name brand muffler, like a single muffler on it. So that was pretty an easy install on the exhaust. Just had to bolt up this flange here and this flange here. The hardest part was just getting the bushings, the hangers on. It's got those silencers in it that are ugly that are probably gonna have to come out, but other than that, it's not too bad. My main thing was I just needed something with bigger piping because the stock piping was much smaller than the aftermarket Y-pipe that I had, and there was kind of a bottleneck right here. Alright, so next thing I'm going to tackle is I got to change the coilovers out. Got to get rid of these stock springs, well, teen springs on stock struts. So here's what we got. Coilovers from ISC. So here's what we're using for springs now. Okay, so I got the adjustable springs in, and now it's time to put the struts in. Alright, struts and springs are in the rear now. There's your ISC strut. There's the spring with the adjuster. Alright guys, so now that I've got my coilovers in, my sway bars in, got the differential in, got my diff brace in, my exhaust, it's time to do some tie rod spacers for a little bit of extra angle. So what I've done here is I've got the steering wheel immobilized. I want to try to maintain some alignment when I take the tie rods off and have to change the settings on them. So you can see the steering wheel is taped to this pole, and the pole is laid across the windowsill, so the steering wheel cannot move while any of this is going on. And I've got these cheap Chinese laser levels here, which you hit this little switch right here, and it puts a laser right on the inner fender here, and I can mark that position. Got the same thing going on over here. The opposite wheel. That position will be marked on the inside of the fender, and then when I change the tie rods and change the settings on them after putting the spacers in, I can realign this back to the mark that I make in that little crosshatch there, and my alignment should be what it was before I messed with the tie rods, and that will be good enough to drive on, and until I can get a good shop alignment done. Okay, here are the GK Tech tie rod spacers I'm going to be using. Now the way that these work is here on the rack, if you pull your boot back, you can see your inner tie rod here. Now when this goes all the way in, when you turn all the way one way, the inner tie rod will stop against the rack here. This kind of shoulder here will stop against that. So what these are is they basically replace your inner tie rod, and with this thinner sleeve here, right here, that's actually thin enough to slide inside the rack and give you just a little bit more range there, and then that'll allow your knuckles to turn a little farther, your steering knuckles. Okay, so since what we're doing here is going to actually change the length of the tie rods, first thing we're going to want to do before we do anything that messes with the alignment is we're going to want to set a reference here. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this laser on. These are just some cheap laser levels that I got on eBay, and I kind of mated them to the flat surface of the rotor here, and you can see it's pointing a little cross on the inner part of the fender here. So right where that intersection is, I'm just going to take this paint pen and I'm going to make a little mark right on that X. And we're going to use that. You can see there's a little dot there now. And we're going to go over here. We're going to do that on the other side also. We're going to switch on our laser. A nice little X. We're going to mark right on the X here. So now no matter what we do to the alignment, we can get back to where we were. Disconnecting the inner tie rod. We're going to clean that up really good with a little bit of brake cleaner, and we'll get some thread locker on those. So next we got to screw the stock inner tie rod back into the spacer here. Okay, so now I got both of the spacers in, and adding these spacers has effectively lengthened the tie rods. So now that has pushed the knuckles out, which means that our alignment is going to be way off. You can see we got toe in on this side, we got major toe in on this side. So this is where our lasers are going to come in to bring us back to our mark. So if you've never messed with the alignment on a car before, what we're going to be doing here is adjusting the toe back into spec. So the way you would do that is you thread the inner tie rod in or out of the outer tie rod to change the length of the tie rod overall. So the first thing you got to do here is you got to break loose this jam nut, which I've already broken loose. Do that on both sides. Now this is free to rotate, so if you look at this, you'll see that we got a lot of toe in. So what we need to do is we need to make this tie rod shorter so that this can toe back out to 0. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to thread this portion of the tie rod into this portion of the tie rod. So we got to back this nut up first to make room. Alright, so if we line up our mark here and get our alignment back on, see a little white dot there, we're going to push on the rotor here until we get that laser lined back up where we were. Right there. And then we're going to look at what we need here. So you can see the threads on this tie rod end right here. And this outer tie rod still comes past where those threads end, so for this to work, it's still going to require a little bit of cutting here. And we have to make sure we leave room for the jam nut too. so it can be locked in place. Alright, so after cutting this much off of the outer tie rod and this much off of the inner tie rod, the alignment is pretty much back to normal where it was. We got our little laser pointer here. Turn on the laser. The laser's pointing right at the white dot that I made earlier. Here's our cut outer. Here's our cut inner. Bolts back on, everything's tightened up, it's adjusted. That's it. Do the other side, and we'll be done. Alright, so I threw the stock wheels back on this thing for now, and I'm going to drop it on the ground and have a look at the ride height. And the moment of truth. That's not too bad. I might leave it like that for now, see how it drives. Alright, so now that I've got the tie rod spacers in, the limiting factor for how much angle I can get at this point are these little stops here. What happens is this stop on the control arm, it hits on this little pad here on the knuckle, and that's meant to limit how far the wheels can travel. So you don't put all that stop load on your rack when you're at full lock. So what we're doing here is, you can see I cut some of that off. Here's the piece that I cut off. And I'm going to keep grinding that down until I get just enough angle so that the wheel and tire just comes short of hitting on the control arm. And I'll show you how much angle I got here now. Alright, so I've cranked the wheel all the way as far as it can go now, and you can see there's still a little bit of clearance before the tire hits the control arm. You can see in here, maybe you can see the stop up in there? That's touching now. So I can grind that back a little bit more if I want to get a little bit more angle. There's actually a lot of angle going on here right now. If I let it go, it kind of settles back, but I'll try to drop down here. And you can see there's quite a bit of angle going on considering we just have spacers on. Okay, so another thing that I got with all these parts that I'm putting in was I got these VMS Neochrome lug nuts, which are pretty cool. I have these on my Miata forged steel. They just look nice and they work good on wheels with small wheel holes because they got this internal drive.
Hey, Brad. Wait, whoa. Hi.
Hi.
Looking good.
Alright, here she is. Outside in the semi-light.
Hey. Oh, wait, you were talking about the car, don't you?
So it's time to do the figure eights to break in the differential. I have to drive this thing in a figure eight pattern for like a half hour to break in the clutches. See how the new exhaust sounds. See how the alignment feels, all that stuff.
Okay, so I am walking up a hill in the dark, alone, trying to follow Bryce so I can, can't barely see. No, you can see me. So I'm gonna go follow him so I can go film some of those figure eights and stuff where there's no potholes. So I told him he had 20 more minutes and he started to drive faster. But that's not gonna make the time pass faster. 1 more minute! You're done! You did it!
Longest 30 minutes ever.
Are you dizzy?
No.
No, you're not dizzy?
You want to write down?
Sure.
Okay, so now that I've driven in a figure 8 like 500 times, I got to change the diff fluid. The break-in procedure is complete.
I timed it.
And Kelsey has to go home because it's getting late.
Yeah.
Alright, so it looks like this thing is actually ready to go drifting this weekend. Just added a couple of quick things to be compliant for the track. The first thing was a tow hook and a fire extinguisher. I got the smallest possible one. So the next thing we need to do is just see how she drifts. Alright, so me and Tony are off to Thompson and we're going to do some drifting and I'm going to find out if all these modifications paid off on the Z. Pretty sure Z's are the new 240s.